Welcome to this 365 Freedom Strategy session. Today we're breaking down the mechanics of energy-aware planning and why you're currently losing the war against your own clock.
It really is a war, isn't it? I mean, it's an operational liability that we see just constantly.
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking at the architecture of how you structure your day, and honestly, if you're operating the way most people do, the foundational logic of your system is just, well, it's completely flawed.
Right. And the reason we're tackling this directly today is because we see this exact same critical failure across the board.
With founders, executives, really anyone managing high stakes.
Exactly. You meticulously track your hours, you optimize your calendar for maximum density, but you completely ignore the actual biological fuel required to execute within those hours.
Right.
So we're examining the 365 Freedom Framework today, specifically the architecture of energy-aware planning. We need to systematically dismantle this traditional hour-based calendar system.
Because right now, you're treating yourself like a machine. And I think that brings us to the first massive conceptual hurdle we need to clear, which is what we call the infinite battery fallacy.
The great term for it.
It's this bizarre illusion of time that our standard productivity tools basically force us to believe. Like when you look at your schedule, traditional planning treats every single hour as mathematically identical.
It's just a catastrophic strategic error.
Yeah.
The core insight driving the 365 Freedom approach is incredibly blunt about this. It states, your calendar shows time, but your body shows energy.
I love that phrasing.
Right, because think about the visual interface of a standard digital calendar. A block of time scheduled from, say, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. It's a visually identical rectangle to a block scheduled from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m.
They take up the exact same amount of pixels on your screen.
Exactly. So the unconscious assumption we make is that the output potential of those two blocks is exactly the same.
But biologically, cognitively, I mean, those 2 hours are inhabiting completely different universes. Not all hours are equal.
No, not even close.
It sounds so incredibly obvious when you say it out loud, yet our entire professional culture is built on the assumption that they are equal.
Right. We inherited this factory floor mentality from the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, where an hour of tightening bolts at 9 a.m. produces the exact same output as an hour of tightening bolts at 4 p.m.
Exactly, because the machine does the heavy lifting. But we aren't tightening bolts anymore. You're making high-stakes, nuanced decisions.
We operate under this delusion that human beings possess this infinite battery that simply resets every time a new meeting starts on the hour.
Right. Regardless of what time of day it is or, the cognitive load we've already carried.
Yeah, the calendar dings, and suddenly we're supposed to be back at 100%.
But the reality of how the brain works is that cognitive fatigue is compounding. It accumulates over the day. Every single decision you make.
Even the small ones, right?
Oh, especially the small ones. Every email you draft, every minor conflict you navigate with a vendor, it all depletes metabolic resources in your prefrontal cortex.
And that's the part of the brain responsible for the heavy lifting.
Exactly. It handles complex problem solving, emotional regulation, impulse control. It is an energy-hungry region.
So by the time you reach that 4 p.m. block, you aren't just, a little tired. You are functionally a different professional than the one who logged on at 9 a.m.
Functionally and neurologically different. Your executive function is depleted.
Wow.
Your decision-making latency is higher. Your brain is actively shifting away from high-level analytical processing and just defaulting to energy-saving mechanisms.
I really want to visualize this because the traditional calendar totally masks what's actually happening here. Think about a high-end restaurant.
Okay, yeah.
You wouldn't staff your kitchen the exact same way at 3 p.m. on a sleepy Tuesday as you would at, say, 7:30 p.m. on a Saturday night.
Right, that would be a terrible business model.
It would be absurd. You scale the staff and the intensity to match the demand in the environment. Yet, we staff our own brains with maximum pressure at 4:30 p.m. on a grueling Thursday. We throw a complex strategic issue at it, and then we act surprised when the service is terrible. That's a great way to frame it. You're demanding peak Saturday night performance from a Tuesday afternoon crew. Exactly. And the system just crashes. Or think about your smartphone. I feel like this is the analogy everyone can feel in their bones. If you look at your phone and it's sitting at 2% battery, it is barely hanging on.
The screen is dimming.
Right. The screen dims, apps are sluggish, all those background processes are shutting off just to keep the device alive. If you tried to initiate a massive, complex operating system update right at that exact moment, what would happen?
Well, this software literally prevents you from doing it.
It won't let you.
Right. It'll either block the update entirely or, if you somehow forced it to happen, it would shut down in the middle of the process and potentially corrupt the entire device.
Right. You would never do that to your phone. You'd look at the battery icon, you'd realize you completely lack the energy capacity for a heavy lift, and you'd wait until you're plugged in and fully charged. But what do you do in your business every single day?
You give us the update.
You force the update. You look at an open 4:30 p.m. slot on Google Calendar, and because the screen says you have an open hour, you schedule a high-stakes strategic planning session. You're trying to run a massive cognitive system update on 2% brain battery.
And the output reflects that 2% battery. It's sluggish, it's prone to errors. The 365 Freedom Framework forces us to contrast the biological reality of these hours.
Yeah.
The sources make it clear there are hours meant specifically for deep focus. These are your high-energy, high-alert periods where your prefrontal cortex is just fully resourced.
They're primed for the update.
Exactly. Then there are hours meant for rest, or at the very least, administrative low-friction tasks. When you swap them, like when you shove deep focus work into a low-energy hour.
Which we all do, constantly.
Right. You aren't just being inefficient when you do that. You're
Yeah.
actively damaging the quality of your work.
Okay, so I get the theory, but I'm trying to picture this in practice. Because if I'm a founder staring down a 60-hour week, how do I actually stop fighting my own biology?
It's tough.
It is. And there's a micro story in the strategy materials about a founder who hit exactly this wall, and I want to pick apart their pivot because it really highlights just how deceptive our calendars can be.
Yeah, that case study is fantastic. The founder in this particular story used to schedule their absolute most demanding creative work late in the day. And the justification they gave is fascinating. They explicitly noted, quote, on paper, it made sense.
On paper, it makes sense. Let's hover on that phrase for a second because that is the trap right there.
Oh, absolutely.
Why are we so easily seduced by what looks mathematically perfect on a spreadsheet, even when our physical reality is screaming that the system is broken?
Well, I think because mathematical perfection offers the illusion of control.
Ah.
The illusion of control. Right. When you're managing a chaotic business, a fully optimized calendar where every single minute is perfectly color-coded and allocated, it makes you feel like you've mastered your environment.
It looks organized. It feels productive.
Exactly. We are culturally conditioned to view an empty space on a calendar as a void, as wasted potential.
Heaven forbid we have 30 minutes of white space.
Right. So we treat those empty blocks as purely logistical containers. We think, I have 60 free minutes at 4 p.m., therefore I can produce 60 minutes of complex thought at 4 p.m.
We just ignore the human element entirely.
Completely. Because, Google Calendar doesn't have a plug-in for metabolic fatigue.
It really should. Someone needs to build that.
Yeah.
But the physical reality always collects its debt, doesn't it?
Always.
In the case study, the founder admits that while the schedule looked great on a screen, they were completely drained. And, we've all been there. The emotional and operational toll of fighting that natural rhythm is just brutal.
It is.
You're sitting there staring at a monitor, reading the exact same email 3 times.
And nothing is sinking in.
Nothing. You're feeling frustrated, feeling incompetent, wondering why you can't just figure it out.
And that frustration actually compounds the fatigue.
Oh, really?
Yeah, biologically. Your brain is releasing cortisol because you're stressed about your lack of productivity, which burns even more energy. You're spinning your wheels in the mud and just burning up the engine.
Wow. So what actually happens when you untangle this? When the founders shifted their approach based on the 365 freedom model, what changed?
The fundamental pivot was moving from hour-based mapping to energy-based mapping.
Okay.
Creative, heavy lift work moved to the mornings, when there's specific energy naturally peaked. Administrative tasks, the low-friction stuff, simple approvals, clearing out the inbox, all of that moved to later in the day.
When they were already tired anyway.
Exactly. And the founder's exact words were, I stopped fighting myself.
I stopped fighting myself. That is the operational friction we're talking about. A paper schedule that ignores biology is a schedule you literally have to fight against every single day of your life.
And it's an exhausting fight.
But wait, I have to play devil's advocate here for a minute.
Sure.
What if I'm fundamentally a night owl? Does this framework still force me to do my heavy lifting at 9 a.m. because that's what the founder in the case study did? Or is morning just a placeholder here?
That's a crucial distinction. Morning is definitely just the placeholder for that specific founder's biological peak.
Okay.
Yeah, the framework isn't about waking up at 5 a.m. and, plunging into an ice bath and forcing yourself to be a morning person.
Right. The whole hustle culture routine.
Exactly. It's not about that at all. It's about auditing your own specific chronotype. If your brain actually fires on all cylinders at 8 p.m., then 8 p.m. is your deep focus window.
So it's totally personalized.
Completely. The error is the mismatch. It's putting the heavy lift in the low battery window regardless of what time the clock actually says. The architecture of your planning simply has to map to the architecture of your energy. So it's a fundamental shift from viewing the calendar as this taskmaster that you're constantly failing to keep up with to viewing it as a supportive structure.
Exactly. Planning should support your capacity, not strain it.
I love that. But I want to elevate the stakes here a bit because we aren't just talking about feeling a little less tired at the end of the day. This isn't just some soft wellness concept about listening to your body.
Not at all. This is a hard, measurable business strategy.
Yeah.
And this brings us to one of the most critical applications of the 365 freedom framework, which is the concept of the resilience window.
Right. Let's get into this.
The material is very explicit about this. It mandates scheduling what it calls testing conversations for the times when you are most resilient.
A testing conversation. We're talking about a hard pricing negotiation, a tense client call, maybe firing an underperforming vendor.
Or delivering difficult feedback to a co-founder.
Yeah. The high-stakes interactions where nuance, patience, emotional intelligence, and strategic foresight are just completely paramount.
You have to view this resilience window as a tangible financial asset.
A financial asset.
Yes. It is not a luxury. If you schedule a tough conversation, let's say a critical contract negotiation, when you are biologically and cognitively drained, you have already lost the negotiation before you even join the Zoom link.
Wow. I mean, I imagine that's because at 4:30 p.m., my brain is just trying to get the call over with so I can log off and go to dinner. Am I just unconsciously giving up my leverage just to save energy?
That is exactly what's happening.
Walk us through the actual mechanics of that failure. What is happening in my head?
Well, when your energy is low, your cognitive defenses are completely down.
Yeah.
As we discussed earlier, your prefrontal cortex is depleted.
Right, the battery's at 2%.
Exactly. So your brain shifts processing to the amygdala, which is much more reactionary and survival focused.
Okay.
It's seeking the path of least resistance because it literally lacks the metabolic fuel for complex problem-solving and emotional regulation.
So the biological imperative overrides the business objective.
Precisely. In a negotiation at 4:30 p.m., your patience is razor thin. You are significantly more likely to miss subtle verbal cues or shifts in tone from the other party.
Because you just don't have the bandwidth to process them.
Right. You are far less capable of holding your ground through an uncomfortable silence.
Oh, and silence is such a key negotiation tactic.
It is.
Yeah.
But it requires immense cognitive control to just sit there and not fill the void. When you're drained, you'll start talking just to relieve the tension.
Wow.
And crucially, you are far more likely to make unnecessary financial concessions simply to end the conversation and escape the cognitive load.
That is wild. You're literally leaving money on the table because your brain wants to stop thinking.
Yes.
So let me challenge you, the listener, right now. Look at your current operating procedure. In your business, you probably treat your financial capital with incredibly strict security.
Oh, of course.
You have complex passwords, you use two-factor authentication, you have rigid approval processes before a single dollar goes out the door, you protect your cash. But you are leaving your resilience window, which is your most valuable daily asset, the literal engine that generates your cash. You're leaving it completely unprotected.
Wide open.
You're leaving it wide open for anyone with your Calendly link to just book an hour and steal your peak cognitive performance. Or worse, book you at your lowest cognitive state for a high-stakes decision.
It's a massive, glaring vulnerability in most people's operations. High energy translates directly to leverage and clarity in a business environment.
It's leverage, exactly.
When you align demanding work with high-energy moments, tasks don't just get done faster. They get done with a higher degree of strategic fidelity. You have to protect that window for what matters most.
Look, it's easy for us to sit here in a studio and say, just don't do hard things at 4 p.m.
Sure.
But the listener is probably thinking, well, tell that to my biggest client who is only in town for one afternoon and demands a 4 p.m. meeting.
Right. The real world gets in the way.
Exactly. How do we actually protect this resilience window when the messy reality of the real world comes knocking? Are we just supposed to say no to revenue?
No, of course not. The messy reality is exactly why you need the framework in the first place. You won't have perfect control over your calendar 100% of the time.
Clients dictate schedules, crises happen.
Exactly. But if you know that a high-stakes meeting absolutely must happen at 4 p.m., energy-aware planning means you engineer the rest of your day to protect the battery for that specific event.
Ah, okay, so you don't burn the morning doing other heavy lifts.
Right. You don't spend 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. doing back-to-back strategy sessions and then stumble into the client meeting completely depleted.
Right.
You shift your low-friction administrative work to the earlier part of the day, effectively preserving your cognitive fuel.
You intentionally bank your energy.
Yes, it's about proactive allocation rather than reactive scrambling.
You manage the energy, not just the time. That makes total sense. But if the logic of this is so clear, if we know we shouldn't drain the battery before the big update, why do we keep doing it?
Yeah, it's the big question.
What is the psychological barrier preventing people from actually implementing this?
The material addresses this directly, and it stems from a massive, culturally ingrained, misplaced guilt over productivity.
Misplaced guilt, like the discipline myth.
The discipline myth,
Yeah.
exactly. The 365 Freedom Strategy identifies a profound mindset shift that has to happen. It notes, when you keep struggling with tasks that should be simple, the issue is not your discipline. It is your timing.
This is huge. I really want to unpack this for the listener.
Go for it.
Imagine you sit down to do a task at 3:30 p.m. It's a task you know how to do. You've done it 100 times. It should take 20 minutes. But you're just staring at it. You're opening new tabs. You're checking your phone. You're procrastinating. The immediate knee-jerk cultural reaction is to blame yourself.
Always.
You think, I'm being lazy. I lack discipline. I just need to push through. If I were a better founder, I would just crush this right now.
We internalize biological fatigue as a moral failing.
A moral failing, yep.
We've been fed this hustle culture narrative that if we were just more dedicated, if we just had more grit, we could force the output at any given moment.
Right. Sleep when you're dead, all that nonsense.
Exactly. But the 365 Freedom Framework completely absolves you of that guilt. It frames that 3:30 p.m. procrastination not as a moral failing, but as a logistical failure of timing.
I think of it like a sailor navigating the ocean.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Relying purely on discipline, relying on forcing work when you are cognitively drained is like trying to row a massive boat across the ocean against the current. Yes, if you row hard enough, if you grit your teeth and apply maximum sheer willpower, you might make a few inches of progress. But you will exhaust yourself, your hands will bleed, and eventually the current is going to push you back anyway.
It's totally unsustainable.
It's a miserable, punishing, inefficient way to travel.
And the output of that forced labor is usually subpar anyway.
Right, because you're exhausted.
Exactly. When you force complex work through a depleted brain, you make errors, you miss details, and then you have to spend your peak energy the next morning fixing the mistakes you made the afternoon before.
Oh man, I've done that so many times.
We all have. It's a vicious cycle of inefficiency. Energy-aware planning breaks that cycle.
Because energy-aware planning is learning how to read the wind.
Yeah.
It's understanding the tides of your own biology and raising the sails at the exact right moment.
Yes.
You stop rowing against the current. You let the natural forces, your biological energy peaks, do the heavy lifting for you. You create the conditions for the boat to move effortlessly.
That is the essence of creating the precise conditions for output to happen organically. You aren't forcing the work. You are aligning the work with the moment the wind is naturally blowing. When you do that, focus flows naturally. Productivity actually feels easier, which is, well, it's a very foreign concept for professionals who have been conditioned to believe that if work doesn't feel agonizing, they aren't working hard enough.
We really have to deprogram that instinct.
Totally.
The idea that suffering equals value is completely counterproductive to scaling a business.
Doesn't scale at all.
So what does the actual tactical implementation of this look like? We've reframed the psychology. We know it isn't a discipline issue. It's a timing issue.
Yeah.
How do we take this from a high-level theory to something the listener can execute today?
The transition to tactical execution is rooted in one very powerful directive from the 365 Freedom material. And it says, your energy is information. Use it.
Your energy is information, not an obstacle to overcome, not an annoyance. It is pure data.
Exactly. When you feel tired, when you feel that friction, that is not a sign that you need a third cup of coffee or, a motivational speech on YouTube. It is raw, objective data from your biological system telling you that your capacity for complex thought is currently offline.
The battery is at 2%.
Exactly. The strategy gives a very specific, actionable mandate here to start the implementation process. It instructs you to notice when your energy is highest today and plan exactly one important task there.
Just one task.
Just one.
I love the simplicity of that mandate.
Yep.
It's not telling you to pull up your calendar, delete every meeting, burn the whole system down, and try to completely overhaul your operational life by tomorrow morning.
No, that would just create more friction.
Yeah, that's overwhelming.
Yeah.
It's just asking for observation. You have
Right.
to run an audit on your own energy patterns.
You have to become an active observer of your internal rhythms. Don't judge them, just record them. Do you wake up sharp and find your energy peaks at 8 a.m.? Or are you a slow starter who has to clear out the inbox first, and you don't really hit your cognitive stride until 11 a.m.?
You have to map the data.
You map it. And the primary symptom that your current approach needs shifting is the feeling of heaviness.
Heaviness. What does that feel like?
If looking at your calendar for the day gives you a sense of dread, you are actively working against yourself.
Wow. You must work with yourself, not against yourself.
Yeah.
That is the strategic imperative.
It really is.
If you treat that energy as data, it changes everything. Let's say you audit yourself this week and you notice that you are consistently sharp, articulate, and resilient between 10 a.m. and noon.
Okay.
Yeah.
That is no longer just a nice feeling. That is now a known operational metric for your business.
A verifiable asset.
Exactly. You take that metric and you ruthlessly apply it to your scheduling.
You protect that specific window like it's a critical company asset. You take the single most important testing conversation of the week or the most demanding creative hurdle you have to clear, and you place it squarely in that peak energy zone.
And you descend it.
You decline other meetings during that time. You put your status to do not disturb. You align the task with the fuel.
And if you do it for just one task today, you will feel the difference immediately.
Oh, without a doubt.
The task will feel lighter, your thoughts will be clearer, and you won't have to row against the current. You're finally letting the biological architecture of your energy dictate the operational architecture of your planning.
And once you feel that lack of friction for one task, you naturally start scaling the approach to the rest of your week.
But does it feel so much better?
Right. It just becomes the default way you operate.
Before we sign off, I want to leave you, the listener, with a provocative thought. Something to really look closely at as you run this audit on your week. I want you to pull up your calendar right now and look at the one task you have been dreading the most. The one you keep pushing back from Tuesday to Wednesday to Thursday.
We all have one.
Ask yourself, is that task actually that difficult? Or have you just been consistently trying to conquer it at the exact wrong hour of your biological clock?
It's a question that almost always reveals a structural flaw rather than a personal one.
If you're ready to align your days with your energy, visit 365 Freedom Online to join the community. This has been a 365 Freedom Strategy session.